Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're focusing on, well, a truly unique individual marine mammal. He didn't just grab scientific attention, he sort of transcended it, didn't he? Became this global cultural icon.
M-
Migaloo.
Migaloo, yeah. He is, without question, the world's most famous all-white humpback whale. And when you look at the sheer volume of sources we have here, you realize we aren't just talking about a statistical blip.
Right.
We're discussing a specific whale, one individual, who became one of the most consistently tracked animals in, well, modern marine history. It's quite something.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To take all these pieces, the biology, the genetics, this whole 30-year story of his documented life and try to understand his specific significance, both
Uh,
scientifically and culturally.
exactly.
So the basics. He's a male humpback whale, Megaplura nova anglae. His public story really kicks off on June 28, 1991. That's the first confirmed sighting near Byron Bay on Australia's east coast.
hmm And based on genetic work done later, scientists reckon he was probably born around 1989. But what's really unique about the Migaloo story, I think, is how he kind of forced this unprecedented level of collaboration.
How so?
Well, his color was just such a massive draw. It led to the White Whale Research Center, the WWRC, being set up in 1997 by Oscar Peterson, specifically to gather and log sightings of him.
And crucially, that center wasn't just relying on, academics and lab coats. They actively used citizen scientists, didn't they?
Absolutely. They leaned heavily on them. Basically, anyone with binoculars and a camera along that migration route could contribute. And this partnership, it generated this incredible wealth of really high-quality observation data over decades.
So it turned this sort of celebrity whale into a genuine scientific asset.
Precisely. And his fame, he wasn't just talk, it led to very real government action. His popularity in Australia just soared, so much so that the Queensland government actually brought in special protective rules just for him.
Just for him.
Well, for him and any other whale that happens to be mostly white, over 90% white is the threshold.
Okay, so his uniqueness literally gave him a legally enforced safety bubble. Tell us a bit more about those protections, because that sounds pretty rare for one specific wild animal.
Oh, it is. It really reflects the cultural value placed on him. The rule basically says any whale in that area confirmed to be over 90% white gets this dedicated non-approach zone.
How big?
It's 500 meters for any boat, commercial, recreational, doesn't matter. And interestingly, 610 meters for aircraft.
Wow, 500 meters is huge. And that aircraft limit? 610 meters? That extra 110 meters, is that about noise? Or the risk from planes getting too low?
It likely accounts for exactly that noise disturbance, the potential risk from aircraft lingering or descending. It suggests the authorities were genuinely concerned about, noise pollution affecting his behavior.
Which makes sense.
Exactly. It shows an awareness of behavioral disturbance, which, as we'll get into later, might have been quite warranted. Now, the downside of being famous is, well, when you disappear, everyone notices. Migaloo was last reliably seen in 2020. And that long gap, it fueled huge amounts of speculation, especially in 2022, when sadly, a dead white humpback washed ashore in Victoria.
Oh, wow. That must have been an incredibly tense time for the researchers, the ones who'd spent decades tracking him.
It really was. But they acted fast. Scientists managed to analyze the carcass pretty quickly and confirmed it was a female whale.
Ah, okay, so definitely not Migaloo.
Definitely not Migaloo. Phew. The scientific thinking now is that, while it feels like a long time to us observers, these long periods without sightings aren't actually that unusual for adult males. It could be down to shifts in their migration routes.
Okay, I get that scientifically gaps can happen. But for this whale, a household name for 30 years, actively sought out by watchers and citizen scientists, is that gap really normal? Or could it suggest he's, I don't know, actively changing his route more drastically to avoid people, more than other whales might?
That's a really critical question.
Yeah.
And it ties right into his behavior, which we need to discuss. But first, we have to address the reason for all this fame and fuss of color. For years, there was this big debate going on in the scientific community.
Right, was he albino? Or something?
Exactly. Was he a true albino? Or leucistic, which means only partial pigment loss, or maybe just generally hypopigmented, just paler than usual.
What were the first clues pointing towards true albinism?
Well, the initial field observations were strongly suggestive. Observers noted some really key details. Things like a definite pinkish color around his blowhole,
Okay.
a complete lack of any dark pigment, even in scars or marks on his body, and also some skin issues, things consistent with being highly sensitive to sunlight. Leucistic animals often still have dark eyes or maybe dark patches on their flukes, but Migaloo seemed uniformly white.
And this is where our deep dive really pays off, isn't it? Because the Australian Marine Mammal Centre delivered the final word with that big study in 2012. They didn't just look, they got samples, slop skin biopsies. They went straight to the DNA.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is how incredibly specific the finding was. They found a single cytosine deletion in his genetic code. Just one letter missing, essentially.
And that caused...
It caused what's called a premature termination signal. Basically, it cut short the instructions for making the tyrosinase protein. And tyrosinase, that's the key enzyme the body needs to make melanin, the pigment.
So identifying that specific mutation in a wild animal, what's the bigger scientific deal there?
It's huge because he had this deletion on both copies of the gene he was homozygous for. It confirmed the molecular basis for something called OCA1A. That's tyrosinase-related oculocutaneous albinism.
Right.
Finding the precise genetic fault line in a large wild marine mammal like this, that's a major achievement. It means, simply put, he is physically incapable of producing pigment anywhere in his body. He is a true albino.
So he's not just a white whale, he's a genetically confirmed reference point. That 2012 study basically established him as the only known true albino humpback in that entire East Australian population.
That distinction changes the game. It elevates him from just a rare sight to an irreplaceable scientific subject.
Yeah.
And that genetic uniqueness brings us right back to his movements, his migrations.
Okay.
Like all humpbacks, Migaloo undertakes these huge seasonal journeys, right, between the anaerotic feeding grounds, rich in krill, and the warmer Australian waters where they breed. They spend maybe 2 months up there.
And his color, again, made him the perfect candidate for long-term tracking. We literally have 30 years of sighting data on one specific individual that allows scientists to study things like migratory fidelity, how consistently a whale sticks to its route and timing with incredible detail.
And that data showed something really interesting about his speed. Researchers calculated his specific migration rate along that eastern Australian coast. He typically covers between 125 and 140 kilometers per day.
Wow.
Which averages out to a sustained mean speed of about 5.2 kilometers per hour.
That sounds fast. Really fast for such a big animal covering those distances day after day. What's the thinking behind that high speed?
It is faster than the average speeds recorded for the general humpback population. Scientists offer 2 main explanations, which kind of compete.
Okay.
The first one, the simpler one, is just that he's an adult male. Adult males often travel faster than, say, females, especially those with young calves or heavily pregnant ones.
Right, that makes sense. Less encumbered. And the second explanation, it brings us back to that question you and I were just discussing about his absences, the idea of harassment.
Precisely. The research suggests his sustained high speed could actually be a behavioral adaptation, a necessary one perhaps, to avoid harassment. Think about it. If you're the most famous whale on the planet.
Everyone wants a look.
Exactly. You're constantly being targeted by whale-watching boats, private boats, maybe even drones or low-flying aircraft trying to get that iconic shot. Maintaining a high speed could simply be a way to shake off persistent followers.
That's a really powerful idea. His fame might grant him legal protection on paper, but in reality, it might force him to burn way more energy just migrating than his peers do.
It's a distinct possibility. And if we look at the historical data, for decades, Migaloo showed remarkable consistency in his timing. He'd pass key spots like Cape Byron or Ballina around the same time each year. That's high sight fidelity.
Okay.
However, the combination of his recent absence from those East Australian waters, plus a confirmed sighting over New Zealand a few years back, well, it strongly suggests that his long-standing migration route might actually be changing.
So consistency, but now variability, that's a key point we should probably circle back to.
Definitely. But before we wrap up, let's shift from his speed and biology to his image, his name. Because that has its own layer of complexity, doesn't it?
The name Migaloo. Yeah, talk us through that.
Well, the researchers chose it early on. They consulted with local Aboriginal elders in Queensland, wanting to use an appropriate name from local Indigenous languages.
And the translation usually given is white fella in some of those Queensland Aboriginal languages. But this is where it gets complicated, right? Discussing cultural ownership, ethical naming, white fella carries a lot of historical weight.
It absolutely does. While the intention might have been purely descriptive and respectful, you can't really separate the term from its cultural context. Migaloo can apparently have other meanings too, sometimes referring to disembodied spirits.
But the main concern raised in some commentaries is using a term synonymous with white colonial settlers for an animal that became this huge national symbol.
Yes, that's the core of the critique. Given the history of colonization and the suffering it caused indigenous Australians, some people question if naming this incredibly famous, unique whale white fella was the most sensitive choice available.
It really highlights that challenge researchers face, doesn't it? Naming a high-profile animal isn't just sticking on a label, it becomes a cultural act. It forces us to think about how science interacts with local history, with identity.
Absolutely. The cultural context is just as vital as the genetic one here.
And speaking of uniqueness, let's make sure we clarify that, because Migaloo often gets mixed up with other white whales that pop up. Right, they all get lumped together in news reports sometimes, but the sources are pretty clear. There are other white humpbacks seen occasionally, but they are almost certainly not true albinos like Migaloo. They're usually leucistic.
That's the key distinction for listeners, yeah. Leucism means only partial loss of pigment. Scientists look for those telltale signs. Does the whale still have dark eyes? Are there any darker patches left on its skin, maybe on the flukes or fins? If yes, it's probably leucistic.
Whereas true albinism, like Migaloo has, means zero pigment anywhere,
Yeah.
affecting the eyes, the skin, even the blowhole color, as you mentioned.
Exactly.
Can you give us an example of one that's often mistaken?
Sure, the calf spotted back in 2011. Sometimes people called it Migaloo Jr. That whale is thought to be leucistic because, when observed closely, it clearly had a dark spot on one of its tail flukes.
Okay.
We also see reports globally, like that mostly white humpback seen way up near Svalbard in Norway back in 2012. How that one had dark eyes and kept some dark coloring underneath its fluke. Clearly leucistic, not albino.
And it feels like every migration season now, there's a new "Is this Migaloo" headline. We saw it in 2022, 2023, with white calves spotted off New South Wales, another off Ningaloo Reef.
And that's where scientists urge caution. The sources remind us that very, very young calves can sometimes look unusually white or even golden for a short period. It's apparently due to a layer of epidermal down they have when born.
Ah, like baby fluff.
Kind of, yeah. So seeing a white calf doesn't automatically mean a new albino has arrived. We'd really need DNA confirmation to be sure.
The only other really well-documented non-Migaloo white whale recently that we have solid data on was that hypopigmented calf seen in Costa Rica in 2022.
That was a big deal, yes, because it was the first documented sighting of any white humpback in the Eastern Pacific. But again, the classification was hypopigmented, reduced pigment, not confirmed OCO1A albinism like Migaloo, unless DNA analysis changes that picture later.
Yeah.
The takeaway is Migaloo still holds that confirmed gold standard for true albinism in humpbacks.
So when we step back and look at this whole story, Migaloo's legacy, it's pretty complex, isn't it? He wasn't just a spectacle, a photogenic freak of nature. He was this convergence point.
He really was a crucial research subject. His unique visibility allowed this amazing collaboration between citizen scientists and academics. They gathered over 30 years of continuous data on migration routes, fidelity, behavior, speed, all focused on one single identifiable individual.
That kind of long-term, high-res record for one whale must be incredibly valuable for understanding the whole East Australian population.
Invaluable. His life became a sort of measuring stick. And given the evidence we talked about, that this icon, who was so consistent for decades, now seems to be changing his path. Whether that's due to age or environmental shifts or maybe deliberately avoiding us.
Right.
Well, we have to think about what that implies.
Right.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. What does tracking one unique, highly visible individual like Migaloo for so long, seeing his potential route changes firsthand? Tell us about how the entire East Australian humpback population might be adapting or maybe struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing ocean environment.